This weekend, the Idaho Republican Party could give a small group of people the power to decide who is worthy of being on the GOP primary ballot. Last summer, just 216 Republican State Central Committee members got together on a remote ranch in Chalice, remember that, to vote on changes to the Idaho GOP rules. One of them ended up being the cornerstone of our Idaho GOP divide story a couple of months ago. And it was this rule here, the Idaho Republican Party Platform Enforcement Rule, where they gave the state GOP Central Committee, legislative district committees, and county central committees the power to call any Republican elected official on the carpet for not following the party platform closely enough, for not being Republican enough. During that very meeting, they issued a vote of no confidence for Governor Brad Little and 14 other Republican lawmakers for voting against last session's library bill. And several other lawmakers have also faced the same scrutiny from their respective legislative district and central committees. The penalty? The possible loss of party support during an election. Well, they found those guilty more than once. If they found those guilty more than once, they could lose access to funds or being included on campaign flyers. That could be the punishment. But apparently, that punishment wasn't enough, because one of the proposed rules to be considered at this weekend's GOP winter meeting would be to not just take away the party support for a second censure, but they would take away the ability for that elected Republican official to be included on a party primary ballot for the next 5 years. And that would apply to any state or county constitutional officer. And like we mentioned back in November, Representatives Mark Sauter, Lori McCann, Julie Yamamoto, Matt Bundy, Kevin Roten, and Stephanie Mickelson were all censured by their respective central committees since last legislative session. And should any of them face the same tribunal coming up this upcoming legislative session, and this rule passes this weekend, well, they could be subject to removal from the 2024 Republican primary ballot. So we decided to ask two of them what they thought of this proposed rule enhancement.
Oh, wow. Wowee.
Republican Representative Julie Yamamoto.
This is incredible.
So you haven't seen this?
No.
And Republican Representative Matt Bundy.
And I'm assuming that you're having me specifically look at prohibit the elected official from being placed on any Idaho Republican primary ballot. Is that correct?
Correct. Are both just learning about a possible rule change within their political party. Any elected official found to have violated any portion of the party platform and censured for a second time could not only lose campaign support from those GOP central committees, but also be kept from appearing on a primary ballot for 5 years. So what do you think of that?
I am amazingly disappointed. I just think whatever happened to the Democratic Republic, where we get to decide who the people vote and decide who represents them. If we were hearing those words outside of the United States, outside of Idaho, Idahoans would be up in arms and saying, who do you think you are? You are not the boss of us. You don't get to decide for me. That's why I go to the ballot box.
Bundy,
I think if we look at that, that's
believes the same thing.
That's a step too far. We take our views to the voters, and that's who determines if we're on the ballot or not. I've gone through 2 election cycles. I've been elected, and I've been reelected, and I'm up for election again. So I have 50,000 people I represent. And so when I make a decision and I look through the issues, I think I'm responsible for the 50,000 people. I'm responsible to the party. I'm responsible to myself, and I'm responsible to my conscience and those around me.
In that order?
Pretty much. I think the responsibility to the voters is number one. And once I get past the voters, I think everything's kind of lumped into the same thing.
As somebody who has been censured once, this puts you kind of one strike away from being susceptible to this.
Right. If all we need is somebody to rate all the bills and say this is what it is, they don't need 105 of us. People want to know that whoever they have there has a mind of their own, and that it isn't because of friendships, it isn't because of special interests, it's not because of somebody took you to lunch, it's because you are looking into the issues, you're trying to look at not just what it says, but what are the far-reaching ramifications of that, what are the intended and unintended consequences, and you make a choice.
Representative Bundy, a 20-year Air Force veteran, when it comes to disagreements in politics, likes to pull from his knowledge of military history.
And my favorite Patton quote is, if everyone in the room's thinking the same thing, then somebody's not thinking. And so I want to be allowed, and I think we have been, In the Republican Party, we're allowed to think, which means we're going to have a difference of opinion on a few things. Obviously, having read that, where a smaller group wants to be able to determine who can and can't be a member of a political party, doesn't seem to be where we've come over the past 250 years of American history.
Well, the timeline included in this proposed rule could also be a cause for concern. A county central committee or a legislative district committee can petition to call a lawmaker on the carpet. And within 10 days, that lawmaker will be notified by the committee chair. Set a date for a hearing, but no sooner than 40 days. However, it can't be longer than 100 days after getting that petition. If 60% of the committee decides to censure that lawmaker, and it's their second offense, well, then they have 30 days to appeal, with an appeal hearing to take place at the next regular meeting of the state executive committee. The next meeting that takes place at least 14 days after the appeal is filed. So let's say a group of precinct committeemen decide they don't like how a Republican lawmaker voted in the last week of a legislative session, which typically hits around the end of March. Let's say they wait a week to file that petition, and let's say they set a date for a hearing at the early possibility, which would be 40 days later, which puts it in the middle of May. And let's say they are censured, and that lawmaker is not allowed to be put on the next primary ballot. Well, the earliest they could have an appeal hearing is 2 weeks after that. By this time, well, we're looking at the end of May. And guess when the primary election takes place in Idaho? Usually around the third week of May. So how's that going to work? And what constitutes a second censure? Is it by more than one central committee, or is it because of more than one vote during the session? These are the questions we would have liked to have answered by either the state party, the Rules Committee chair, or the person who submitted the rule change. But we have yet to hear back from Idaho GOP Chairwoman Dorothy Moon, Brett Regan, or Harry Heath. The winter meeting Rules Committee, that meets tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the Harvest Church in Meridian.